Boracay. You hear the name and you probably think of perfect white sand, stunning sunsets, paradise. But what if I told you that for decades, the legal ownership of every single hotel, every home, every inch of that famous beach was completely up in the air? Well, today we're diving into the story of that very battle. It's a fascinating clash between people who had lived there for generations and a powerful legal principle that questioned everything. So how are we going to break this all down? Well, we're actually going to follow the court's own playbook. We'll look at this landmark case in 6 parts, from the basic facts all the way to the final verdict, to really understand who owns paradise. Okay, first up, let's get the lay of the land. We're talking about the facts of the case. Before any court can make a decision, it has to figure out what actually happened, who the key players were, and what brought them all the way to the Supreme Court. Right, so this whole thing didn't just pop up overnight. You can trace it back to 1978 when President Marcos called Boracay a tourist zone. That created a lot of uncertainty, so much so that by 1997, a group of longtime residents went to court. They were trying to get titles to their land but felt stuck. And then things got even more interesting in 2006, when President Arroyo stepped in and officially classified the island, splitting it between protected forest and land that could, finally, be privately owned. And this slide really gets to the heart of the conflict. On one side, you have the claimants. Their argument is all about history and possession. They're saying, hey, we've been here forever, our families have been here since at least 1945. On the other side, you've got the government, which is making a very strict legal argument. They're saying Boracay has always been unclassified public land, which, legally speaking, makes it a public forest, and that means it belongs to the state until the state says otherwise. So, with these two completely opposite views, the Supreme Court had to take all this complexity and distill it down to one single, crucial legal question. The answer to this question would decide everything. And there it is. That's the core issue. This is the whole ballgame, right? Could generations of living on the land, farming it, building on it, could all of that eventually ripen into actual legal ownership? Especially if the government had never given the official green light and said, okay, this land is now open for private ownership. So after digging through nearly 100 years of Philippine land law, from the American colonial period all the way to the present, the court came back with its answer. And let me tell you, it was unambiguous. The court's answer was a clear, firm no. They found that the private claimants simply did not have a legal right to titles over the land. But, and this is a huge but, a simple no doesn't even begin to tell the whole story. The real meat of the decision, the part that matters for everyone, is the reasoning behind it, what lawyers call the ratio decidendi. So why? Why did the court rule this way? Well, it all hangs on this one foundational, super powerful legal idea that basically governs all land in the Philippines. It's called the Regalian Doctrine. And here's the deal. It says that all lands of the public domain belong to the state, period. The state is the original owner of everything. Think of it this way. The state owns a giant library. Just because you've been borrowing a book for 50 years, maybe your dad borrowed it before you, doesn't make it yours. It only becomes yours when the librarian, the state, officially stamps it and says, you can have it. And you don't have to take my word for it. Look at what the Supreme Court itself said. This is the key. It's not enough to just be there for a long time. There has to be a positive act from the government. That means a law, a proclamation, something official and deliberate that changes the land status from state-owned to available for private hands. To back all this up, the court basically gave a history lesson, and it shows this really interesting shift in power. See, back in the early 1900s, courts could actually classify land. But starting in 1919, that power was taken away from the courts and given exclusively to the executive branch. And that's been a law ever since, affirmed again in 1936. For almost a century now, only the president has the power to classify public land. Then you have this critical piece of the puzzle from 1975. This decree is a real game changer. It says something super important. Any public land that hasn't been specifically classified as, say, agricultural or mineral land is by default considered a public forest. So legally, that meant Boracay, with its beautiful beaches, was technically a forest. And this is where your brain might do a little flip. The court said, look, The word forest here is a legal status, not a description of what you see with your eyes. So it doesn't matter if the land is covered in coconut trees or five-star resorts. If the government hasn't officially changed its legal status, it remains a public forest. Okay, let's boil this whole thing down. If you're going to remember one single powerful legal principle from this entire case, what is it? Here it is. This is the doctrine of the case. Basically, if land hasn't been officially declared alienable and disposable by the government, it stays with the state. It's legally a public forest. And here's the kicker. Possession, no matter how long, we're talking decades, even centuries, cannot turn into ownership. That positive act we talked about, it's non-negotiable. All right, so let's move on to the final act of the court. This is called the disposition. It's basically the court's final set of orders that put an end to the legal battle and decided Boracay's future. And the court's decision was a clean sweep. First, it granted the government's petition, which meant it overturned the lower court's decision that had sided with the residents. At the same time, it dismissed a separate petition from landowners who wanted to cancel President Arroyo's 2006 proclamation. The government's position, based on the Regalian Doctrine, was upheld completely. But hold on, the court didn't just drop the hammer and walk away, it actually threw a lifeline. By upholding that 2006 proclamation, which classified a huge chunk of Boracay as agricultural land, the court effectively said, this isn't an eviction notice. It opened the door for the people living in those specific areas to finally, legally, apply for ownership through the proper government channels. And so the battle for Boracay was settled. But the court's powerful decision, well, it sent shockwaves far beyond just one island. It leaves us with this huge, lingering question. This ruling has massive implications that echo far beyond Boracay's shores, affecting countless communities on islands and lands all across the country that remain, to this very day, unclassified.